What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to The Common Coder. My name is Josh, and in this video, I'm going to be showing you what I believe to be the top 10 extensions in Visual Studio Code that are specific to web developers. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so on my screen here, I have an instance of Visual Studio Code open. Now, if you're not familiar with Visual Studio Code, I do have several videos talking about how to install it, an overview of how to use it, keyboard shortcuts, all that kind of stuff. So if you're not familiar with Visual Studio Code, I definitely recommend checking those videos out and then coming back to this one to learn about these extensions. So we're going to be working primarily in this extensions panel here, and this is where we're going to search for and install our extensions. So the very first extension that we're going to look at is something called Open in Browser. So this is a very simple extension that allows you to right click on your files and open them up in a browser. So Visual Studio Code doesn't come with any support for this out of the box. You can edit your files, but if you want to open them in a browser, you have to go to the browser and physically open them. So it's a very useful extension for beginning web developers. Now, if you're farther along in your web development journey and you're starting to work with servers and stuff like that, it's a bit primitive for that, but we're going to go ahead and cover it anyways, because I find myself using it just when I want to, edit files and want to see what those files look like. Very useful extension for that purpose without having to get involved with any kind of server. All right, so to use the extensions panel, we're going to go ahead and use the search box up here at the top, and we are going to search for Open in Browser. And if I spelled browser right, that'd probably be pretty good. Browser, there we go. All right, so we can see here, this is the first one. It's got 9.7 million downloads. And like I said, it's very, very simple. So what we're going to go ahead and do is go ahead and click the install button. And now we can see that it is installed in my extensions panel. If I clear my search box, I can see now in my installed section, I do have this open in browser. So what does this actually do? So let's go ahead and close this and close the extensions panel. And I'm going to go ahead and open my Explorer and then click on my index.html. So if I wanted to preview this in the browser, I would have to go to Google Chrome or whatever your browser of choice is, find the file and open it, right? So obviously that's not ideal. I want to be able to do it here from Visual Studio Code. So with this extension installed, I can either right click on the page itself, and I have this context menu here that now says open in default browser, or I can right click on the file over here in the Explorer panel, and I have that same option here. So open in default browser. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. My default browser is Google Chrome, and you can see that this opened up inside of my browser. And notice here, we're not using HTTP file paths here. So this is an actual file. You can see that over here on the left, and it's going straight to my users folder, Common Coder, basically the location of this file on my machine. And we're just opening the file to preview it. Okay, so this is Open in Browser, gives us a very quick shortcut to open the file inside of Chrome or our browser of choice to test our changes. And probably saw if we take a look at the options here, if I wanted to use a different browser, so if you're a Firefox or an Edge developer, you can use open in other browser, and then you can choose from the browser that you want. So for example, if I wanted to open inside of Safari, I can go ahead and do that, and now it will open my page inside of Safari. It takes a second, and there we go. All right, so the next extension that we're going to look at is something that is very similar to what we just saw with Open in Browser. However, this time we are actually going to get servers involved. So the name of this extension is called Live Server. So if I go and open my extensions panel again, and up here in the search bar, I search for Live Server. We can see at the very top, this is the one that we're looking for. And it's the one, at least as of this recording, that has 46.9 million downloads. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on this. It is a very, very popular extension in the web development community. One of the nice things about this extension is it will host your project in a local development server for you. So you don't have to configure anything, which is really nice. However, it supports a really, really nice feature of automatically reloading the page anytime you make a change. So this is very, very powerful when it comes to very rapid and iterative development. You can develop your code in one screen and you can immediately see those changes on the other side without even having to hit reload. So let's go ahead and see how this works. I'm going to go ahead and click install. And similar to what we saw with Open in Browser, if I go back to my File Explorer, I'm going to go ahead and close this. A couple things happen when we install this. So first of all, when I right click a file, I get an option that says Open with Live Server, and there's even a keyboard shortcut for that. It also gives us this little Go Live button down here at the bottom, and it says click to run Live Server. So this will open my project in Live Server. So let me go ahead and click this, and immediately opens Google Chrome. Notice up here at the top now, we are running on localhost. And what's cool here, so if I go ahead and shrink this down, check this out. So if we go to, maybe we want to change this from, this is the about page. Actually, let's go back to index since that's what we're on. So this is the index page. Let's go ahead and change this to welcome to my website. And as soon as I hit save, browser automatically reloads and that new text is there. So you can see that this is very, very powerful for developing quickly. You can edit your code in the editor here and immediately see your changes being applied. So for example, if I wanted to create some additional things, let's just say I had a paragraph and I wanted to say live server is pretty awesome. Hit save. And there we go. Live server is pretty awesome. So I don't have to refresh. I can see those changes being applied in real time. So if I wanted to make the background of this page blue for whatever reason, I could say body. Go ahead and say background color blue and save this. And there you can see the CSS change applied right away. So you can see how helpful this could be when developing HTML and CSS across your project or your application. I'm gonna go ahead and just undo this because I don't want that blue. And then when I'm done, I can go ahead and just click the little button down here at the bottom. It'll say disposing and it says server is now offline. Okay, so you can always see that down here in the bottom. If you want to open a specific page in live server, you can right click and then click open with live server. That will start live server and then we'll open to the specific page that you clicked on. So pretty cool stuff. I'll go ahead and shut it down one more time. And this is live server. All right, so the next extension that we're going to look at is going to help us make sure that our HTML is valid. And this extension is called the W3C Validator. So it's not actually put out by the W3C. It's an extension that someone put together to work with those APIs and let you know inside of VS Code whether or not your HTML is valid. So I actually covered this extension in another video talking about HTML validation. So if you want to learn about HTML validation, I definitely recommend going and checking out that video to learn all about what we're actually validating against and some of the history of web standards and things like that. All right, so let's go ahead and search for this and we'll say W3C Validator. And there's a few extensions here, but the one that I'm looking for is this W3C Web Validator. So I'm gonna go ahead and click on this and then I'm going to click install. And once this extension is installed, I'm gonna go ahead and close this. I can go to any HTML file. And as soon as I open the file, you'll see that there is this button down here at the bottom that says W3C validation. So depending on which file that I'm on, I can go ahead and run the W3C validation service against this file. Okay, so this basically skips the step of having to extract our code or, point the W3C validation service to a live website somewhere. This lets us do it right inside Visual Studio Code, which is going to save us a bunch of time. So I can go ahead and click on this button. And it's telling me that the document isn't valid. I have 1 error, 0 warning, 0 infos. And so up here at the top, you can see that it gives me some syntax highlighting up here, letting me know where the problems are. And I even have this problems tab here, which will give me all of the information about the validation errors that the service found. So we can see that if I hover over this, it's saying consider adding a lang attribute to the HTML start tag to declare the language of this document. This isn't an error, but it is a warning letting us know that, this is probably a best practice. So let's go ahead and add that here. On the HTML tag, we'll say lang equals en. And then similarly on the meta tag, it's letting us know that I don't have a char set. So let's go ahead and add that as well. Char set is going to be UTF-8. And I'll go ahead and save that. And now no problems have been detected in this workspace. I can go ahead and run the validation service again. And now it tells me that my HTML file is valid. So like I said, if there is more you want to learn about HTML validation, what web standards are, what we're actually validating against, definitely check out the video that I will link up here in the card thing, wherever it's at. There's a lot of information in there that talks about validation and specifically covers what this extension is using behind the scenes to actually do that validation. All right, so the next extension that we're going to look at is something that's very similar to the W3C validator that we just took a look at, but it's going to provide even better hinting and help us make sure that we write really, really well-written HTML code. And what's really nice about this one is it also works with frameworks like React and Angular, where you're using HTML template type syntax, and it will validate that as well. So this is something that the W3C validator doesn't do. And the W3C validator also doesn't give you like tips and best practices on the things that are important for your HTML code. It's mainly just checking to see if your code meets the HTML spec, which is something a little bit different than best practices to make sure that your code is accessible, well written, structured correctly, stuff like that. So let's go ahead and take a look at this. This extension is called Webhint. So if I type in Webhint here, and I'll go ahead and click on this, Developer is Webhint. It's got 42,000 downloads, so a little less popular than some of the other ones. It's a little bit lesser known, but it's very powerful, and it's actually used internally in one of Microsoft's extensions. So the Microsoft Edge Tools extension uses this internally for giving you HTML hints and things like that. So we can see that it says to use Webhint to improve your website during development, and it gives us all kinds of feedback and different informations about our HTML. So let's go ahead and install this. All right, so one important thing about this extension to know is that you need to have Node and NPM installed in order for it to work. So Node is a JavaScript runtime for server-side development. So it lets you do things like work with the file system and create web servers and things like that, used on the back-end side of full stack development. So we need to go ahead and install Node and NPM. NPM comes with Node in order for this to work. So installing Node is super easy. We can just go to nodejs.org. And whatever the download says right here, download Node.js long-term support. So I'm gonna go ahead and download this, extract the package, go ahead and click continue, agree, install, enter your password if you need to. And there we go. So I'm gonna go ahead and move that to trash. All right, so I'm gonna go ahead and restart Visual Studio Code to make sure that we pick up these changes. I'm gonna go ahead and minimize the browser. So after I've restarted, it might take a minute for Webhint to start analyzing your files, but you can see once it does that, you'll start getting some color changes here over here on the left-hand side. The little problems panel down here at the bottom, we can see that it starts telling us information about our various files. So there's our about, our contact, and our index. And then I can click on these, and this gives you a ton of information about what's going on in your file. And it gives it to us in real time, unlike the W3C validation tool, where we have to continuously click the button and have the W3C validation service analyze our file and give us back those results. So this is pretty cool. So I can go ahead and either click one of these. So it says a viewport meta element was not specified. So a little bit out of scope, but this basically lets us specify what the viewport is essentially supposed to be for our application. This is important when it comes to working with different screen sizes. So we have desktop, we have mobile. We kind of want to let the browser know initially what it's designed to be displayed on. And so that's what this viewport meta element is actually there for. And I can click on this and it'll actually give me information about why this is important. Meta viewport warns against not having a single viewport meta tag in the head. Why is it important? It's an essential part of responsive web design. So again, that comes down to expanding and contracting your layout for support on desktop or mobile development. And it's really, really cool. You can learn a lot of different things inside of here. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this initial tag and go ahead and paste it up here in the top, and we'll see that error went away. Okay, and so it just says meta name viewport, content width is the device width, and the initial scale is 1. So we're not trying to scale anything, and we're specifying that information to the browser. Second here, I removed the laying attribute. So it's saying HTML element must have a laying attribute. Again, I can go ahead and click on this and I can get more information about this. And it tells me how to fix the problem, and it links to the associated documentation across different sources on the web. So you can see this is coming from Deck University, whereas this other one came from the Webhint docs itself. But there's a ton of information in here. And again, all this information is being funneled into Visual Studio Code, and it allows us to, make sure that our websites are going to be the most accessible, most semantically correct, things like that. So I can go ahead and fix this and just say lang equals en. And now all that went away. And so I'll go ahead and copy this, add it to my other files here, go ahead and add my laying attribute. And so notice when we ran the W3C validation service, it didn't specify anything about this meta viewport. So again, W3C validation service is really just checking to make sure that our HTML is valid per the HTML spec. The meta viewport is a best practice when it comes to modern web development, because we have to deal with so many different screen sizes, and responsive design is an important aspect of modern day web development. All right, so the next extension that we're going to look at is something that's going to make working with CSS just a little bit easier. In this example, I have an H1 here on my page that has a class of red border. And if I go to my styles.css, you can see that we have a class called red border, and it sets the border property of this element to 3 pixels solid red. Okay, and so we can see what this looks like in the browser. So if I go ahead and use my preview in browser extension, I could say open a default browser, and then there is my red border. Very simple example, but if I'm in this index.html file, I can do like a search and maybe look for the class name and things like that. But we can actually do this a lot easier by taking advantage of an extension called CSS Peek. So what this will allow us to do is hover over the class and it will automatically give us information about the properties that are being set by that CSS class. So let's go ahead and open our extensions panel again. We'll go ahead and look for CSS Peek. And you can see that this one has about 5.5 million downloads. I'm gonna go ahead and click install here, and it's gonna take a second to install. Then I'm gonna go ahead and close all of my files. So now what we can do, if I open my index file back up again, see how I have my class red border here? If I hold Command on Mac or Control on a PC, you can see that it makes it look kind of like a link, but if I hover over this, I can see that style being applied to that element. So I can easily see, okay, this H1 has a border of 3 pixels solid red. And what's really cool is I can even click on this and that will navigate me directly to my CSS file. So it makes it very, very easy to work with your CSS from an external file. You can see what style is being applied and you can quickly navigate to that file in order to make the changes in your CSS file. So very simple, but a very powerful extension, especially for those of us that work with CSS on a regular basis. All right, the next extension that we're going to look at is one that's going to help us format our code, and that extension is called Prettier. So we're going to go ahead and look for it in our extensions panel, search for it up here at the top, and you spell that Prettier. And it should be the first one that pops up. You can see that it has 43 million downloads as of the time of this recording. And this is a really nice utility that lets us make sure that our code is formatted correctly. And it will let us share our configuration. If we are working on a shared code base, we can make sure that all developers have that same configuration. So the first thing that we need to do is go ahead and install it. And once it's installed, I can go into one of my files. And from here, there's a couple different ways that I can format my file. So the easiest way that I like to do it is just to right click on the file. Now Visual Studio Code actually has a built-in formatter. So if I click on this format document with, we can actually see that I have Prettier. So it's recognizing that as one formatter. And then I have this HTML language features, which is the one that Visual Studio Code comes with. So if I click on this one, you'll notice nothing happens because that's what I use to format my document initially. So again, if I click on format document with, go ahead and select Prettier. And now you'll see that I get different formatting based on the default Prettier config. So when you install the Prettier extension, it reads from a global configuration that you can then customize per project using something called a Prettier RC file. So we'll go ahead and see that here in just a second. I'm gonna go ahead and save this. One other thing that you might wanna do is set Prettier as your default formatter. So right here, when I click on format document with, there's an option right here to configure the default formatter. And you can see that I had already selected Prettier here as my default. I'm gonna go ahead and click that again. And then now anytime that I use this format document, that will format my document using Prettier. One other thing that I like to do inside of the settings is enable something called format on save. So if I go to my code menu, click on settings and then settings again, up here in the search bar, I'm going to apply this across all of my projects. So I'm just going to click the user tab here. So I do have a Visual Studio Code overview video that talks a little bit more about these settings and the difference between the user and the workspace settings. So if you're curious to know a little bit more about that, I would definitely consider checking that out, and I'll link that up here in the top. All right, so what I'm going to do is go ahead and search for format. So if I scroll down just a little bit, there is an option here that says editor format on save. So I'm going to go ahead and click this on and then exit out of my settings. So now anytime I open a file and then save it, my formatting will automatically get applied. All right, so the last thing that we're going to see here is how to overwrite some of the default settings. So whenever you're using Prettier, you can use something called a Prettier RC file, and that file will allow you to override the global settings. So inside of my project, I'm going to go ahead and click in the open space here so I can create a new file inside of this main VS Code extensions folder. I'm going to click the little plus button and then type .Prettier RC. Basically, this is just a JSON file that lets you specify different Prettier rules. You can check all these rules out in the Prettier documentation. But for example, let's just say in my JavaScript, instead of having single quotes in my JavaScript, I wanted to enforce the use of double quotes. Inside my Prettier RC file, I can go ahead and create a JSON object. And then for my key, you can see that Visual Studio Code is already giving me some hinting here. I can use the single quote property and then set that to false. And so now inside of my JavaScript file, when I go ahead and save it, notice how nothing happens here. It's because I haven't configured a default formatter for JavaScript files yet. So same thing here. I'm gonna go ahead and right click, select format document with. I'm gonna click configure default formatter and then select Prettier. And so now when I hit save, you'll notice that the quotes were changed to double quotes, and I didn't have to do anything here. That's all enforced by the use of this Prettier.rc file. So one caveat when using this extension, if you're working in any npm-based project, so if you have a package.json file, you'll want to make sure that you install Prettier as a dev dependency inside of your project, and that will make sure that everybody that's working within that project has the same exact version of Prettier, because even small minor version bumps could have slightly different formatting depending on which version of Prettier you have installed. And so you definitely want to avoid that if you are working across a team. Make sure you install Prettier using npm as a dev dependency inside of your project. All right, so the next extension that we're going to look at is one that's going to help us write better JavaScript code, and that extension is called ESLint. So if I go into my extensions panel again, go ahead and search for ESLint. Should be the very first one that shows up, even has a little blue star up in the top left corner. This one is from Microsoft, so it's an official extension from Microsoft. As of the time of this recording, it has about 33.7 million downloads. So it's very, very popular in the web development community. Now, this extension is one of the first extensions where we're going to actually need our project to be an npm-based project. So it needs to have a package.json file. It's also going to need an ESLint config file in order for it to work. And ESLint is going to either need to be installed globally on my machine or locally inside of this project. So let's go ahead and get started with this. So the first thing I'm going to do is go ahead and install the extension. Now that doesn't do anything by itself, because if I go to my JavaScript file, I can see down here that the extension was installed, this little set of curly braces. However, if I click this link here that says open ESLint output, you will see that it's telling me a bunch of things. So it's saying it's starting the server, it's running. Basically, it's telling me that there's no ESLint RC file found. So consider running ESLint init in the workspace. The extension also installs a command to do that for me. So I'm actually going to use that. I'm going to click up here in the top, click show and run commands, and then I'm going to search for ESLint and click this create ESLint configuration. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. And it may prompt you to install some missing packages if you haven't installed those yet. But even then you might get an error because it's telling me that there's no package.json inside of this project, and that is needed to initialize ESLint. So this stems from NPM and NPM-based projects. And so NPM is kind of out of the scope for this video, but basically if you're doing any kind of modern web development, chances are you're going to be using NPM at some point. And so ESLint requires your project to be NPM-based in order to install and use it. So this is actually very, very easy. All I need to do inside of my terminal here is run npm init, and then I'm going to do this -y flag just to accept all of the defaults. And what this will do is create a package.json that you see here, but I accepted all the defaults and this is what I get as a result. All right, so now what we're gonna do is go ahead and try to run our ESLint command again. So I'm gonna go back up here to the top, show and run commands, create ESLint configuration. And you can see that it's asking me, what would you like to do? So how would you like to use ESLint? To either check syntax only, to check syntax and find problems, to check syntax, find problems, and enforce coding style. So I'm actually going to choose that. That sounds pretty good. What type of modules does your project use? I haven't really set this up here, but by default, the web, at least modern web, we can take advantage of JavaScript modules if we want to. So I'm going to go ahead and just use JavaScript modules. And then what framework does your project use? I'm not using any of these. Does my project use TypeScript? No. Where does my code run? This is a web project, so it's running in the browser. What would you like to use for your style guide? So this is basically a agreed upon set of rules that is going to be enforced across the project. It's saying use a popular style guide or answer questions about your style. I'm just going to use a popular one, and probably one of the most popular ones is this Airbnb config. So I'm going to go ahead and click that. What format do you want your config file to be in? I'm going to go ahead and click JSON, and it's telling me that I need to install some additional configurations. Would I like to install them now? Yes, I would. Which package manager do I use? I'm going to go ahead and choose npm. All right, now if you got an error during that process, it's because you'll need to run that ESLint init command with sudo or be running Visual Studio Code as administrator. So I forgot to do that, so I need to go ahead and redo this. So I'll say sudo ESLint --init. And there we go. So now everything's been installed. We can see that we added our node modules folder with all of our dependencies, added our package.json, and it listed ESLint, ESLint config Airbnb base. So this is our default configuration, and an ESLint plugin to support the import syntax inside of our code. But now if I go to my JavaScript file, you can see that this JavaScript file is not in very good shape. We can hover over these to see what the problem is. So at first it's telling me unexpected var. So modern JavaScript discourages the use of var. So we want to go ahead and change this to let. And then we can see that since I'm redeclaring the variable, it's telling me identifier foo has already been declared, and it cannot redeclare block scope variable foo. So I'll just call this foo1, but then we can see, oh, that's not good, unexpected var. So I need to change this to let as well. And then again here, this one's telling me that bar is not defined, because even though you can technically assign a value to a variable without using the let or const keyword, it will actually create that variable in the global space, and it will cause all kinds of problems. So we don't want to do that. So we'll go ahead and say let here as well. And even then, you can see that ESLint is saying, hey, that strings must be single quotes. So I have some conflicts here between my Prettier and my ESLint rules. And then you can see here that all of these, it's basically telling me that I've assigned a value and I've never used it. So all of these tools and all of this hinting is going to help us write better JavaScript code. I can go ahead and fix the quoting issue by going into my ESLint RC file. And I'm actually going to get rid of the .json because it's JSON by default. All right, so if I want this to play nicely with my Prettier config, what I want to do is go ahead and go to my ESLint RC file. And what I can do here is I can either set the property to be the same as what's inside of Prettier, or I can disable the rule completely and just let Prettier handle it. So depends on what you want to do. There's even a pre-baked config that will turn off a lot of the Prettier rules inside of ESLint. But what I'm going to do here is go ahead and just make the rule the same. And that way I can customize it later on down the road if I want to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and use the quotes rule, and I can either turn it on or off. But what I want to do is specifically make sure that it's set to double. So to do this, I need to use this array syntax, and I still want to enforce errors. So I'll say first property here is going to be error. And then the second thing inside of this array here is going to be double. All right, and now if I go back to my script file, we'll see that I no longer have this single quote error from ESLint. However, it's still telling me that, hey, you have a problem here. You got some variables that you're actually not using in this file. Either use them or or get rid of them. So what I can do is go ahead and just put some console.logs. So let's say console.log, and then you can see here that it's giving me even more optimizations, telling me, okay, well, this is never reassigned. You should use const instead. So I'll go ahead and change these to const. And all of these rules are configurable inside of the ESLint config, but usually you want some defaults. So that way you can make sure that you're writing the best code that you can. And ESLint's going to go ahead and enforce those rules across the board. So if you're working with other developers, everybody has to conform to the same set of rules. All right, so a little bit more configuration than the rest of the extensions that we've looked at so far, but ESLint is a super, super helpful tool for working with JavaScript and making sure you're writing really, really good, valid JavaScript code, and that you're not falling into any kind of common pitfalls or gotchas or just writing bad or sloppy code. So this is ESLint. All right, so the next extension that we're going to look at is something that you might not think you need, and it's something that we take for granted across a lot of different programs that we have these days. But this extension specifically lets us check our spelling. So when you're working across applications, especially if we're working with like static sites or marketing type of materials where you have lots of words and stuff on the screen, you want to make sure those things are spelled correctly, and Visual Studio Code doesn't give that to you out of the box. So this extension is called Code Spell Checker. So if we go to our extensions panel, start typing in code, spell, and we can see right here, there's actually a bunch of variations of this for different languages, but we're going to go ahead and choose this one up here at the top. You can see it's fairly popular. It's got 10 million downloads as of the time of this recording. And basically it's a spell checker for Visual Studio Code that works well with code and documents and helps us catch common spelling errors while keeping the number of false positives low. So pretty cool extension. Let's go ahead and install it. And you can see this extension is enabled globally, so it should work across any project that I use. And now if I go into my code here, let me see if I can find a spelling error. So let's go ahead and introduce one. So in my about page here, I'll just go ahead and add an extra E here on home. And you can see that now I have a little blue squiggly underline. And if I hover over this, it says home, unknown word from C-spell. And basically I can go ahead and fix it here. So this is really, really cool because, like I said, this is not built into Visual Studio Code. So I can click this here at the bottom and it will take me into this page where I can check out some user settings, my workspace settings, particular files that I'm looking at. So right now I was on the About page, so this is what I see. I can add or remove stuff from my dictionary, can view a little bit about this code spell checker. So it's a very simple extension, but it is something that you wouldn't normally think about while you're developing software. And it's very common to accidentally misspell things, and this will help you avoid those type of mistakes. All right, so we saw that little blurb about trying to keep false positives to a minimum. And so one of the things it does pretty well is recognize common, variables and things like that that you normally use in programming. So for example, I go to my scripts file, you can see that it's not giving me any kind of false positive here using foo and bar, which is kind of common for introducing programming concepts, just making up weird variable names. However, if I was to maybe change this to not foo, but introduce my home spelling, right? So home with a couple extra E's, you can see that, hey, this is not a known word. And so it even works in JavaScript files as well as HTML files. So pretty cool extension. Like I said, very simple, but it will help us minimize these types of spelling errors inside of our code base. All right, the next extension that we're going to look at is something that's going to help us write better comments, and that is literally the name of the extension. The extension is called Better Comments. So if we go up here to our extensions panel, type in Better Comments, and we can see that it's going to be this one here at the top, and you can see pretty much what this does. So it gives us the ability to categorize our comments with annotations that include things like alerts, queries, to-dos, highlights, etc., etc. So we can see an example here. We can have our normal green comments inside of VS Code, and I can use a slightly different version. So this one will be highlighted here at the top. If I use an asterisk, if I use an exclamation point, it will highlight it in red. If I use a question mark, it'll kind of make more of an info. So a question, so it'll turn it blue. A to-do, this will turn it orange, and you can see how this would be very helpful rather than just having the same color comments across your whole entire code base. It'll draw attention to those comments and let other developers know the importance or the significance of those comments. So let me go ahead and install this. We'll look at this very, very briefly, and let's go back to my scripts.js. So let me go ahead and add a comment here, and I'll just say leaving these here for informational purposes. All right, so this is the normal green comment color. However, if I wanted to draw some emphasis to these, right, I can go ahead and add an exclamation point, and now this comment turns red, and any developer using this extension will immediately be able to see that and be like, hey, this is probably really important since it's a different color than most of my other comments that are in my file. Similarly, if I wanted to leave a note for a developer to remove these later on, I can say to do, colon, and notice how the to-dos turn orange. So I can say remove these after demo. Right? And so we can use these kind of context-based comments to add additional emphasis or draw additional attention to those comments. So if I wanted to change this from a to-do and just put like a question mark, like should we remove these? Or if I just wanted to make it a slightly different color than all my other comments, I could just put an asterisk, and you can see it's a slightly different color green. So pretty simple, but it does enhance the developer experience and lets you add additional context into your comments, which isn't possible without the extension. So that is Better Comments. All right, so the last extension that we're going to look at is one that is by none other than John Papa himself, and this extension is called Peacock. So not to be confused with the streaming service Peacock. This is an extension that will allow us to change the coloring very easily inside of Visual Studio Code. So let's go up here to the extensions panel and type in Peacock. And you can see here, it's by John Papa. Go ahead and click this. Got a cool little logo here as well. And what it does is lets you subtly change the color of your Visual Studio Code workspace. So this is actually pretty cool when you have multiple instances of VS Code running. So imagine you have a client in one repository and a server in another. You're working across those code bases at the same time. If you have some color context to that, it's going to help you not get so confused as to which code base that you're working in. So let's go ahead and install the extension. And then now up here in the command palette, if we go to show and run commands, type in Peacock, and basically it says change to a favorite color, color to peacock green, darken, enter a color, lighten, open the documentation. There's a bunch of different things we can do here. So I'm just going to go ahead and click change to a favorite color. We have a couple different options. So we got Angular red, Azure blue, JavaScript yellow, Mandalorian blue, Node green, React blue. Let's go with React blue. All right, and you can see that changes my whole entire outer border of Visual Studio Code to this React looking blue color. All right, now notice how it doesn't change your theme of Visual Studio Code. So this is very important. It's not meant to change the theme. So I know some people like to change their Visual Studio Code theme and change the editor like to all kinds of crazy colors and different fonts and all that. But having this extra layer, this extra context as to what project that I'm working in at any given time, this will let me quickly identify that, hey, my VS Code extensions project is like this light blue color. And then if I open another instance of Visual Studio Code, notice how this one's just regular. So if I wanted to open up my VS Code overview project, so I can do the same thing here. I can go up to my command palette and run Peacock, change to a favorite color, and maybe I want this one to be JavaScript yellow. All right, and so now whenever I open these, I can quickly identify that, hey, this one is my VS Code overview. It's this bright yellow. And this one here is my VS Code extensions project, which is bright blue. Again, not meant to completely theme Visual Studio Code. There's lots of different ways to do that if you want to mess around with the themes, but it does let you identify your workspace by color, which is great because trying to keep track of which one you're working with when they all look the same actually is much harder than it sounds. So this tool actually helps out with that quite a bit. All right, so those are the top 10 Visual Studio Code extensions for web developers. Thank you so much for coding along with me today. If you like this video, please give me a like down below. And if you're new here, please subscribe. We'll be exploring Visual Studio Code in more detail. We're going to be learning all about the web and web development, and I would love to have you along for the journey. So until next time, be sure to stay curious, never stop learning, and I will see you all in the next video.